6 days. That's how long my grandmother had been in the ground. 6 days, and when I pulled into her driveway, the first thing I saw wasn't her porch light, or her wind chimes, or the tomato plants she'd babied every summer of my life. It was a sign. Hammered straight into her front lawn. For sale. By the end of that same week, my own family would call me a liar. A leech. A woman who'd lived off an old woman's charity 4 years. They said it to my face, in her living room, 5 days after her funeral. What none of them knew, what none of them could have possibly guessed, was that my grandmother had already made her decision about that house over a year before she died. And she'd hidden the proof behind a locked door, waiting for exactly this moment. My name is Emily. I'm 28. Red hair, freckles across my nose that my grandmother used to count out loud when I was little, and on that afternoon, blue eyes doing everything they could not to spill over in front of a realtor's sign. I sat in my car a long time before I could make myself move. Then I let myself in with the spare key hidden under the flower pot, the key only I ever actually used, because I was the only one who ever actually visited. The house still smelled like her. Lavender, old paper, vanilla candles. For one terrible, beautiful second I thought I might hear her call out from the kitchen asking if I wanted tea. Instead I heard voices. Raised ones. We agreed. 3-way split. Simple as that. That was my Aunt Linda, sharp and certain, the voice of a woman who had never once doubted she deserved whatever she was asking for. I walked into the living room and found my father hunched on the couch, staring at the floor like he wished it would swallow him. My father has always been a quiet man, not gentle quiet, but the quiet of someone who'd rather stay silent than fight his own sister. Linda stood by the fireplace, already dressed like she'd come from a closing meeting. Her husband Gary scrolled his phone, half listening. And beside him sat my cousin Chad, who hadn't shown up to a single family holiday in 5 years but had apparently found the time for this. Spread across the coffee table, a listing agreement. A glossy folder with a realtor's smiling logo. What is this? I asked. We were just finalizing things with the house, Linda said, like she'd been waiting for exactly that cue. Finalizing what? She's been gone less than a week. The house needs to be sold. None of us live nearby, it needs repairs, the market's good right now. We already spoke to an agent. Without telling me. Emily. Her voice sharpened. I don't think you understand how this works. The house belongs to the estate. It gets split between the children, that's your father and me. You're a grandchild. You don't have a legal claim. Then, colder, you've been living rent-free in that apartment she helped you get, for years. You've taken enough from this family already, don't you think? It wasn't even true. She'd loaned me a deposit 2 years earlier, after my divorce, and I'd paid back every cent, on time, every month. But that never mattered to Linda. In her version of our family, I was the charity case, and everyone else was simply entitled to whatever was left behind. I looked at my father, silently begging him to say something. He looked at his hands instead. Emily, let's not make this harder than it has to be. I didn't argue. Arguing with Linda was like arguing with a wall that talked back and never listened. I went upstairs instead, to say goodbye to her room, if that was still allowed. Nobody answered. Her bedroom was untouched, the same handmade quilt, her reading glasses folded beside a half-finished crossword, a mug still carrying the faint ring of tea at the bottom. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let myself cry, the way I hadn't let myself at the funeral. My mother died when I was 9. My father, drowning in his own grief, leaned on his own mother to fill every gap he couldn't fill himself, and she became the one who packed my lunches, sat with me through thunderstorms, taught me to bake bread and stand up straight even when I felt like disappearing. She used to say the same thing to me, over and over, like a ritual between us. You're the one who stayed, Emily. Family isn't about blood. It's about who stays. That's when I noticed the small wooden jewelry box on her dresser, always locked, always private, though it never held anything more valuable than costume jewelry. I opened it, expecting rings and pins. Instead, an envelope. My name, in her careful, looping handwriting. My hands were shaking before I even opened it. Asterisk, my dearest Emily. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and things down there are already getting complicated. I know my daughter. I love her. But I know her. This house is yours. It has been yours for over a year now. I didn't tell anyone, because I knew that if people found out too soon, there would be fighting, and things said that couldn't be unsaid. There's a key taped to the back of this letter. It opens the old cabinet in my closet, the one you always joked was full of ghosts. Inside you'll find everything you need. I gave you this house because you were the only one who ever came to sit with me just to sit with me. Not to ask for anything. Not to check on an inheritance. Don't let them bully you out of what's rightfully yours. And when the time comes, do something good with this place. I love you more than these words can hold. Grandma Rose. Taped to the back was a small brass key. I knelt in front of that cabinet with my heart in my throat. The lock was stiff, but it turned. Inside was a thick folder with a lawyer's letterhead across the top. Property transfer documents. Notarized. Dated over a year earlier. Her signature, steady and deliberate, right beside my own name. The house belonged to me. Legally. Completely. And nobody downstairs had the faintest idea. I didn't say anything that night. Part of me wanted to march downstairs and slap that folder on the coffee table in front of Linda's real estate binder. But something told me to wait, and 3 days later, I understood exactly why. My father called, his voice tight and strange. Emily, I need to tell you something before you hear it from Linda. She wants to move the closing date up. She's got a private buyer, some investor who flips houses. She's offering a discount if he closes fast. My stomach dropped. There's no accepted offer yet, he went on. It's off the open market. I think she suspects something, about the will. Mom's lawyer called her last week asking about a document release, and she's been paranoid ever since. She's trying to sell before anyone can stop her. Linda wasn't just selfish. She was scared. And scared people do reckless, ugly things when they think what they believe they're owed is slipping away. I met with a lawyer, Denise, calm, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who spoke like every sentence had already been proofread twice. She read through everything and looked up. This is airtight. The house is yours, has been for over a year. But if your aunt pushes through a private sale before the estate is settled, we could end up in a mess. I want to file an emergency notice today. Then she slid a second folder toward me. Your grandmother left something else with our firm, a sealed letter. To be opened only if her wishes were formally challenged. I went straight to the house that evening. Linda opened the door already annoyed, braced for some emotional plea she could roll her eyes through. Instead I handed her the folder. Her face moved through confusion, disbelief, and finally a rage so cold the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. This is fake. Mom would have told me. She didn't want to, I said. Because she knew exactly what would happen if you found out too soon. The private sale, the rushed closing, this is exactly what she was afraid of. You manipulated her, Linda hissed. Worming your way into her trust for years. I didn't manipulate anyone. I just showed up. Consistently. Which is more than you can say. I'll get a lawyer. This will not stand. It does stand, I said quietly. I am this family. She slammed the door behind me hard enough to rattle the sunflower wind chimes. I stood on the porch for a moment, shaking, listening to her voice rise inside, already back on the phone, already trying to find someone who could make this problem, me, disappear. I didn't know it yet, but that phone call was the first domino in something much bigger than either of us expected. 2 weeks later I was served with legal papers. Linda had hired an attorney and filed a formal challenge, alleging my grandmother had been suffering cognitive decline at the signing, and that I had exerted undue influence over a vulnerable elderly woman. Undue influence. Exploitation of a vulnerable adult. She was willing to call me an elder abuser, publicly, in a courtroom, to get her hands on a house. I fell apart a little that night. Then Denise reminded me, it was time to open the sealed letter. We met in her office 3 days later. My father came, sitting stiffly beside me like a man walking into a confession he'd been avoiding his whole life. Denise broke the seal and read it aloud. Asterisk to whoever is reading this with a lawyer present, I imagine things have gone exactly the way I feared. Let me say this plainly. I was of sound mind and full legal capacity when I transferred my home to my granddaughter Emily. I underwent a full cognitive evaluation with my physician specifically to prevent exactly this kind of challenge, because I know my daughter, and I know how she behaves when she feels she's owed something. Linda has never once visited me without an agenda. Emily has never once visited me with one. She's the one who stayed. I am leaving my house to the one who stayed. If a judge is reading this, I ask you to look not at who is legally entitled to fight for this house, but at who actually showed up for the woman who lived in it. My father's shoulders shook silently beside me. She knew, he whispered. She prepared for all of it. I reached over and took his hand. For the first time in years, he let me. Denise subpoenaed the medical records and deposed the physician named in the letter, a tired, kind man in a cardigan who described a cognitive assessment 14 months before her death showing full mental capacity. She specifically asked me to document this, he said, because she told me, quote, my daughter is going to try something someday, and I want the paper trail ready. I watched Linda's attorney's confidence falter for the first time. The real turning point came from a phone call I almost didn't answer, my cousin Chad. I need to tell you something, he said, and my mom is going to hate me for it, but I can't keep sitting on this. The night you brought the documents to the house, I heard her on the phone with her lawyer. She wasn't just planning the undue influence claim. She said she still had an old, unsigned draft of Grandma's will from years ago, and she was talking about having someone alter the date to make it look more recent. My stomach turned over. I don't know if she went through with it, Chad said, but I heard her say it, and I've felt sick ever since. Grandma used to slip me $20 and tell me to take a girl to a nice dinner instead of ordering pizza. I never visited her enough to deserve that. You did. I can't be part of my mom stealing that from you. 2 days later he sent Denise a voice memo he'd recorded that night, half by accident, half because some part of him already knew he might need it. It wasn't perfectly clear, but it was enough. Denise looked up at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her yet. This changes everything. Tempting to alter a legal document isn't just going to sink her civil case. That's potential fraud. Within a week, Linda's attorney withdrew, citing irreconcilable differences, which Denise translated privately as, he'd realized his client might be committing a felony and wanted nothing to do with it. Without a lawyer, without a medical leg to stand on, and now facing the quiet, terrifying possibility that her own son had handed over evidence against her, Linda withdrew the lawsuit less than 10 days later. I didn't celebrate. I'd won, completely, undeniably, but I'd also watched my aunt try to forge a dead woman's final wishes, watched my cousin turn against his own mother out of guilt, watched my father cry in a lawyer's office over a letter he should have had the courage to defend from the beginning. Nobody wins a war like that. You just survive it. My father showed up at my door 3 days later, looking older than I'd ever seen him. I should have said something that day, when Linda called you a leech living off Mom's charity. I should have defended you, and I've hated myself since. I asked him, gently, why he hadn't. Because Linda has always been louder than me, he said. I learned a long time ago the easiest way to survive this family was to not be in the room when the demanding started. I did that when your mother was sick, too. I went quiet instead of showing up, and you paid for that as a little girl. I've never forgiven myself. I felt something in my chest loosen. You're here now, I said. That has to count for something. I stepped aside and let him in. It wasn't a full repair, but it was a start. Linda and I didn't speak for 4 months. Eventually she sent a short, stiff email that took her, Chad later told me, 3 drafts to write. I'm not going to pretend everything I did was right. I was scared, and I let that fear turn into something ugly. I'm not asking you to forgive me, I don't think I've earned that yet. But I wanted you to know that I know what I did. I sat with it 2 weeks before I answered. 3 lines, nothing more. Thank you for saying that. I don't know what our relationship looks like going forward, but I'm willing to find out slowly. If you are. We still are. Slowly. By the time the first snow fell, the house looked different, though the sunflower wind chimes still hung by the door, the lavender still lined the front path, the porch swing still creaked exactly the way it always had. But the inside had transformed. The formal dining room became a bright common room full of soft armchairs and bookshelves. 3 dusty guest rooms became cozy private rooms, each with a hand-painted nameplate on the door instead of a number, Because I wanted it to feel like a home, not a facility. I used my savings and a small business loan to turn my grandmother's house into a modest boarding home for elderly people who had nowhere else to go, people whose own families had, in one way or another, forgotten to stay. A small hand-painted sign now stands exactly where the for sale sign used to be hammered into the lawn. Rose's house. A home for those who stay. I think of my grandmother constantly, walking those halls now, Mr. Alvarez, who plays chess every afternoon and has never once let me win. Mrs. Chen, who insists on gardening despite her bad knees. Old Harold, whose quiet dignity reminds me so much of her that some evenings I have to step outside just to catch my breath. In the evenings I sit in what used to be her bedroom, now my little office, and look at her photograph on the desk. I did something good with it, Grandma, I whisper sometimes, when the house has gone quiet. Just like you asked. If there's one thing this taught me, it's that family isn't only about blood, and it isn't about who shows up loudest in a crisis demanding their share. I watched my aunt try to forge a document to steal something that was never hers. I watched my father stay silent while I was humiliated in a room that was supposed to love me. And I watched my cousin choose truth over blood loyalty when it actually mattered. Sometimes the truest kind of love is quiet. It shows up in small visits and shared cups of tea, in the years someone spends simply staying, without ever asking for anything back. And sometimes, if you're loved by someone as thorough and as fierce as my grandmother was, that quiet love gets remembered, protected, even from beyond the grave, with locked cabinets and sealed letters and a doctor's report arranged years in advance by a woman who knew exactly what her family was capable of, and loved one of us enough to prepare for it anyway. I didn't just inherit a house. I inherited a lesson in exactly what kind of person I want to be for the people I love, the kind who stays. Not because I'm owed anything for it, but because staying, in the end, turned out to be the only inheritance that ever really mattered. Some nights, when I lock up the house after checking on everyone, I stand on that same porch where the for sale sign once stood, and I think about how close I came to losing all of it, not just the walls and the floorboards, but the memory of who my grandmother really was. If she hadn't been careful. If she hadn't trusted me enough to prepare for the worst in the people she loved most. I try to carry that same kind of care forward now, with every resident who walks through that door, because somebody, somewhere, has to be the one who stays. And I decided a long time ago that it was going to be me.